Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is John Ruffin, and I love programming computers. I do. I also like to share what I've learned. So if you have any questions on this screencast, you can reach me on Twitter at John Ruffin. Today we're going to talk about StrongLoop and specifically StrongLoop's LoopBack NodeJS framework. StrongLoop is an IBM company specializing in Node.js. Loopback is one of their many Node.js modules, open source. In fact, when you think Node.js, you should probably think StrongLoop because 5 of the top 10 contributors to the Node.js project proper are employees for StrongLoop. So what is Loopback? Loopback is a highly extensible open source Node.js framework. It allows you to quickly create dynamic end-to-end REST APIs. It also allows you to connect devices and browsers to data and services. This might be a little fuzzy, so let's take a methodical approach to understanding these 3 statements. Now this might take some mental gymnastics because you have to think differently, and I call it developing a Node.js or server-side JavaScript mindset. Let's see if we can spread it out a little bit. Here is the description of Node taken directly from the nodejs.org website. Node.js is a JavaScript runtime built on Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine, uses an event-driven non-blocking I/O model that makes it lightweight and efficient. We have our description, but we're trying to develop our mindset. We're trying to dig a little bit deeper and trying to figure out what's really going on here. So what is a JavaScript runtime? I think the spec might have something to say about this topic. ECMAScript is an object-oriented programming language, okay, for performing computations, yep, got that, and manipulating computational objects, got that too, within a host environment. Aha, a host environment. For the longest, this host environment has been synonymous with the browser. The browser is the host environment for ECMAScript spec implementation, right? The browser includes a JavaScript engine. The spec also says that the host environment can add additional functionality outside of what the spec defines. Here, you can think of the ubiquitous set timeout function or the set interval function. These are not part of ECMAScript. You won't find them in, let's say, the Chrome V8 engine. You won't find them there. They are provided by the host environment, by the browser. Think about how the browser translates HTML into document object model. And once you get into the document object model, you can do all type of JavaScript scripting. So the browser, the host environment, provides this document object model, and then you can use JavaScript on the DOM. What does this host environment stuff have to do with Node.js? Well, everything. The spec says that we need a host environment which may have some other capabilities, right? Didn't say that this host environment has to be the browser. Enter the Node.js framework, who is a host environment that offers other capabilities. Here's the key, which include server-side functionality. Yes. You might be asking, what's the difference between a server-side JavaScript host environment and a client-side JavaScript host environment? Now let me pose the question another way, since we're talking mindset. I would think, what are the concerns of a server-side JavaScript host environment? Aha. So, just like any host environment, client or server, that host environment has to implement ECMAScript, right? Got to do some JavaScript. And secondly, and here, get ready for the server-side mental gymnastics, you have to think I/O, input-output. Think read-write when you're thinking server-side. Think interacting with the file system or the disk, right? Think interacting with the network or HTTP. And here's one I want you to file away for later. Think interacting with the database or Datasource. All these are server-side concerns. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Make sure we have it. We're talking about I/O. As programmers, we've been conditioned to take as a given that I/O is costly and slow. I mean, it just is, right? So we don't even think about the latency and the blocking that goes on, for instance, when we send a request to query the database and the app just sits there, it sits and sits and waits on a response. I remember creating some aspect-oriented programming in Java to help with these kind of cross-cutting concerns and spawning extra threads. But you know, when you have extra threads, it increases your memory usage. It does. In Node, you never sit and wait on an I/O event, or anything for that matter. Your code never stops, which also calls for some mental gymnastics, but it never stops. In Node, no JavaScript function should ever directly perform I/O, and this is how things speed up in Node.js. Let's take an even deeper look at the Node.js host environment stack. So an I/O request is going to come in, it's going to have everything it needs, and it's going to say, here you go, Node, do this I/O, and then call me back at this typically anonymous function whenever you get done. So that I/O request is going to come through the Node.js core library. Then it's going to go through the bindings, which I kind of think of as a translation layer, to get to libuv. Libuv does much of the I/O in operating system heavy lifting. Ever wonder why you don't have to say, if Windows do this, if Linux do this? libuv does all this cross-cutting operating system conversion for us. And when it's done doing its processing of your I/O request, it's going to send a response back to V8. It is indeed this stack which enables the event-driven, non-blocking I/O model with callbacks that makes Node so fun and efficient. So your whole mindset takeaway from this is Node is a JavaScript host environment, right? Similar to the browser, but with additional functionality for server-side concerns. Things like I/O, reading and writing, file system, HTTP, network, database, those type of concerns. So what server-side concern is Loopback going to address using the Node.js framework and host environment? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's going to help us quickly create dynamic end-to-end REST APIs. It's also going to help us connect devices and browsers to those APIs, right, to get the data and the services. But that might not be clear. So let me give you a little bit of context about that. Many moons ago, I used to be an Apple Web Objects developer. You familiar? Think Steve Jobs. Think Next Step. Think the technologies that iTunes and the Apple Store are built in. Think Objective-C, right? At that time, I was using Java 1.3. Yeah, even before the term J2EE came on. But anyhow, I created an online reorder system for a company that now happens to be a big part of Express Scripts. Web Objects, the technology has something called the Enterprise Object Modeler, the EO Modeler. Do you know what the EO Modeler did? Yeah, believe it or not, it helped you connect data and services to the browsers. The EO Modeler actually predates TopLink, right, which is an ORM tool. Both of these tools actually predate Hibernate, which I also used in a lot of my Spring Java Server Faces applications. Hibernate has something called Hibernate Tools, which would allow you to reverse engineer a database, right? Look at the database, inspect the tables, create data access objects, right? Endpoints, resources, so your front end could do all sorts of CRUD operations. So fast forward to today, now you really know what Loopback is using Node.js. Server-side JavaScript for creating these RESTful resources, endpoints, to get to the data and data sources on your back end. All right, let's get to some keystrokes. What we see here is the StrongLoop website, a plethora of information here, strongloop.com. But what we want to get to we want to get to docs.strongloop.com. The first thing you're going to see here is how to install StrongLoop for your specific operating system. I'm on a Mac, so let's click on installing on Mac OS. So at the very top, you're going to see some prerequisites, like you have to have Node installed, and then it's going to tell you to set some permissions for directories. And here's the magic: npm install-g StrongLoop. So we're going to install StrongLoop globally and not in the project itself. I already have StrongLoop installed, so you just go to the terminal and have at it. After getting StrongLoop installed, you want to come back to the documentation and find the Getting Started section. So here are the topics we're going to cover in our Getting Started. We're going to create a simple API, learn how to use the API Explorer. We're going to connect a data source. We're going to extend the API, and we're going to add a static web page. And what is this thing about adding a custom express route? At the command line, you're going to type SLC LoopBack. But what is SLC? Well, when you install StrongLoop, you receive the StrongLoop command line interface. This command line interface is going to do a lot of powerful work for you. One thing it's going to do is going to use some Yeoman generators to scaffold out parts of the application for you. Let's run it and we'll walk through it together. SLC LoopBack, let's hit enter, and now you're going to see the node process start. It's spinning up there. Now you get some ASCII return, and it says, what's the name of your application? So if you're like me, you're probably curious as to exactly what's going on here. I had to go find the source to see what exactly is going on. There is a project called Generator-Loopback, which details, well, actually it's the source for how Loopback uses Yeoman to scaffold out your application. So if you go up to, I guess it's around line 100, there you will see what's the name of your application. And you can step through this just like your application running on the StrongLoop command line. Let's keep going. Let's minimize this and get back to creating our API. So the name of our API is going to be My Loopback Getting Started. Then it's going to ask in which directory do we want the project. So we're going to just click enter, keeping the same project. Now everything's going to fire off, and you see npm doing this thing, is installing some node packages. That command is now complete, and it gives us some clear instructions as to what we can do next. For instance, it says change directory into your app, right? And then you can run SLC LoopBack model. Then there's a SLC arc command, which is the GUI for doing most of what we're doing right now in the command line. So we're going to cd into our app. Now we're going to run the next command, SLC LoopBack model. This is going to create our model for us in memory. Right now it is detached, not connected to a database. It's asking us our model name. We're going to call it Coffee Shop. Again, we are somewhat following the Getting Started section on the StrongLoop Getting Started website. Again, we're starting from scratch, so it's going to ask us what data source do we want to attach Coffee Shop to. Well, we don't have any data sources yet. At this point, we only have the in-memory data source option. In a few minutes, we're going to see how to change that to use MySQL. The next question we need to answer is, what model base class do we want to extend? So out of the box, Loopback gives us some classes that we can extend. And I'm pretty excited about this because there's a lot of security built in. I've done a lot of Spring security, Assidia security work where I would show and hide information on the screen based on a user's groups in their LDAP. And I recently done some SailPoint identity and access management work where least privilege is vitally important. This loopback tool allows you to strip away everybody's access down to nothing and then build up based on their roles and groups. I think that's best practice. I like that. We are going to select the persistent model base class because this is the base class that lets you tie your model to a database, SQL or NoSQL database. The next question asks, do we want to expose Coffee Shop via the REST API? And for this particular instance, yes, we do. The next question asks, do we want a particular or a custom plural name? So you might have a person table, singular, and you might want to have the plural form of it be people table. So this is what the custom plural name allows you to do. The next question is pretty interesting. It asks, do you want your model to be common or server only? Meaning, if it is common, it can be used on the server or the client. Or if it's server only, then it's just on the server. So I guess you would think of isomorphic JavaScript, right? JavaScript that runs on the browser and on the server. Next thing we want to do is set some properties on the model. This will be synonymous with columns in the database. So the first property name that we're going to set, which the documentation tells us to set, is a property called name. And then the second property is going to be city. But what you see over here to the right in the browser are the data types, the types of properties you can set. You have a string, number, boolean, object, array, date, buffer, geopoint, and some other types of property types. So we're going to create our name. We're going to assign it to a string. Right now I'm just showing you all of the available types. Hit enter on string, and now it asks if it's required. We're going to say yes, it's required. Now we're going to add our city property. Again, the available types. It's going to be a string. Is it required? We're going to say yes. And now we're done for now, so just hit enter and then this will exit. So StrongLoop has done quite a bit of work for us using the command line tools. Let's take a look at some of the code, some of the scaffolding. So we're in our project, my Loopback Getting Started project. Now let's look at the package JSON file. This is always fun. You have a description down below. There's a repo area. There's an area for dev dependencies. And then here are the dependencies for when you want to deploy your app. You have Loopback Boot, Loopback Component Explorer. And up here you have the scripts area where you have the start. Right, it's going to do node dot. And the version, all the typical npm information. Here we're looking at server/server.js. Now, if you look closely, this might look similar to Express because Loopback is built on Express. You see you have an app.emit there, so this extends some kind of event emitter. And then you see some console log information there. That console log information is going to display when we start the app. So we're running npm start. We're going to start the app, and now you're going to see the web server listening at information display in the console. That is the same information that is on that server.js file. So we're actually starting the web server now. Next thing we want to do is take a look at our app in what's called the App Explorer. This is our user interface kind of API Explorer. You see we have two models there, the user model, which is public, and the coffee shop model. The user model we get by default. And you'll see here, this is the API. So the API is RESTful. You have your get methods, your put methods, your post methods, your head options. Everything here is somewhat REST specific. Not a lot of hypermedia as the engine of application state, but these are the methods on HTTP. And you can see that you have your resources, and you can have parameters on your resources. Like for instance, you can have a user ID on the URI, and that will bring back one specific user. You also have built-in log in, log out, reset, and update on the user. So this is, you get these for free on this user object, which you can extend. You saw that earlier when you create your model. So here's our coffee shop model, which only extends the persistent. It doesn't have everything that the user model has, but you can see that it has, again, the same HTTP methods and the URI. All right, so let's drill into the configuration for the get all coffee shops endpoint. In here, you'll see that we have a filter where you can do some ordering. It's like a specialized where clause. Up above, you see the name and the city. Click try out, and here is the curl command that is executed. Here you can see we have no and empty response body because we don't actually have any coffee shops yet. So now we're going to use the post HTTP method to go ahead and create one. I'm going to fill in the name of the coffee shop. We're going to call it Rough House Coffee. I'm going to say the city is, I don't know, what's one of my favorite cities? I guess, okay, Vail. See, the ID is 0. We're not actually going to populate that. It's going to populate, auto-populate. Hit try it out. Now you see the curl script that was executed. There is the RESTful, the request URL, and here is the response body. And now you see the ID has auto incremented to 1. So we got a response code of 200, which means we're all good. Now we should be able to go back up, run the get method again, try it out, and now our response should be, okay, there it is. We have a Rough House Coffee. So let's take a look at the configuration object for our model, coffee-shop.json. Now if you look in here, you see the ID injection is true, and you see all the other parameters that we already set. We could have actually created this by hand. Up until this point, we've been using an in-memory data source. Now we're going to use MySQL integration. First thing we're going to do, we're going to run SLC loopback :datasource. And then it's going to give us some options from which to choose, which type of data source we want to actually integrate with. So here you see that we have in memory, again, we have email, we have MySQL, Postgres is supported. Let's scroll down a little bit, and we will see SQL Server at MongoDB, a whole host of supported and community supported connectors. So we are going to select the MySQL data source. We have a problem. Oh, I know, we are trying to install a data source, but haven't installed a connector yet. Let's do that now. All right, we've installed the MySQL connector, and now we can go ahead and configure the data source. We're going to enter a data source name. We're going to call it Datasource MySQL. And you'll see I'm using a little different naming convention than what's on the StrongLoop website, but that's okay. I think they're calling it MySQL DS. And here are some other parameters that need to be set in server/datasources.json. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And we're going to go down and select MySQL. Now we're going to go, we're good right now. Now we need to go into that source file and add these parameters. So now you can see I've added those parameters, and no, I'm not going to show you the password. I feel even a little funny putting the password in this demo, but I would never do that for a real application. So there you have it. We need to do one more piece of configuration in our server model-config.json file. So we need to add our data source name for coffee shop. So we have MySQL configured. The next thing we want to do, according to the demo, is we want to create some test data. Now be careful. If you look at the top up there on that auto migrate can be dangerous because it will drop and recreate the tables. Well, this is a boot module, so every time the system reboots, this is going to run and it's going to drop and recreate the tables for you. Let's go ahead and create this module that's going to create us some sample data inside of a new file in the boot directory. We've created this file in our boot directory. You can see that it's using our data source up at the top at line number 2. Line number 4 is using apps.models.coffeeshop.create. And we're passing in some objects for it to create, and that's what it's going to do. It's going to add those records to the database. Again, every time the system reboots, this is going to run. It's going to drop and recreate the tables. All right, let's go ahead and restart the server so we can make sure that this boot process is working. Type npm start, enter, and voila. Oops, we have an error. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, I believe I know. Let's scroll up and look at the error message. Oh, it's saying that our data source does not exist. Oh, I fat fingered it. See that? DSM, there's no Y. So let's go back down to our config object with the Y in, save it. Alright, we'll go back over here and rerun that command. npm start, let's see if that fixes it. Alright, we're good to go. We're good to go. Let's do one more check. Look in the database itself and see if our records are actually there. So we're going to use this database, sloop_getting_started, and then we're going to do a select all from coffee shop, run it, and voila, there's our data. There are the 3 records we told it to insert when we boot up. Let's also take a look at our API and make sure the API is still functioning properly. So there you can see we executed. There are our records in the API as well. So we checked the database and the API, and we look good. Our model looks good so far, and we've proven that we have now integrated with MySQL. Now we want to make a custom endpoint, something that we did not get out of the box. Let's say we want to return a message that says, hey, we're open for business or we're not open for business based on the time of day. So between 6 and 8 p.m., we're open for business. Any other time, we're not. And that's the message we're going to return. So we need a custom remote method. If you're following along on the StrongLoop website, don't be alarmed. My code is a little bit different. I'm using some ES6 constructs, some constants, some templating, that type of thing. So we are in coffee-shops.js inside of the models folder. This is our model, our module. You can see at the top that we're passing in an object called coffee shop, and then on the very next line we are extending it with a new attribute called status. We are assigning the function to coffeeshop.status, and then we're doing some logic. And on line number 16, we are creating a remote method, and we're saying on line number 18, if we get an HTTP request, a GET request at /status, then we're going to return the status, and it's going to be a string. Restarting our app and going over to the API Explorer, we now see we have a coffee shops /status endpoint. And we just executed it, and we see that we are open. So we are in between the normal business operating hours. So last thing we're going to do is we're going to create a web page that's going to exercise our API a little bit. I'm going to use something new. I'm going to use the HTML5 fetch function. And I'm also going to do something silly. I'm going to throw a React.js component on the page too, just so we can do it. All right, let's go. All right, so in order to create a web page for our app, we need to do two kind of configuration things. The first thing we want to do is we want to delete this root.js file. Why? Because again, this is in the boot folder, and this guy is going to run no matter what. And this is also saying that, hey, anything that comes in with slash, that's what you want to execute. We don't need this file anymore, so we're going to delete it. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to go down to our middleware.json, and we're going to add these lines right here under files. Basically, this is saying that I want you to serve things from /client, and in /client we now have, right, this is new, we have an index.html file. Give it a title called Hello React, and I'm importing some React and React DOM. And then down here is a script. Basically, this is just rendering a React component. And then down here, for our purposes, we have another script tag. I know I'm going through this fairly quickly, but it's using the new HTML5 fetch command. So we're saying fetch, and we're calling our API for all coffee shops. And then this uses the promise. You see the then, right? After it does that, if it's not a 200 status code, it's going to say oops. It's going to return the status code. Again, another template using the text. Then over here, if this response is good, then we're going to console log out the data. And we're going to see that execute in the browser. So let's open the browser. And let's go to on the root page, which is at port 3000. Hit enter. So now you see that this is our React.js component. See, it's updating without page refresh. But what about us exercising our REST API? How do we see that? Well, if you open up the console, you'll see that we have printed our 3 records. They've been fetched from the new JavaScript function fetch. And there you have it, folks. This is my implementation of the loopback getting started. Again, my name is John Ruffin, and it's been fun. Bye.